In 1996, rancher Cal Hartley rang the bell for supper, but his 8-year-old triplets, Emma, Luke, and Sophie, never came running. For years the case sat cold, neighbors whispering, files collecting dust. Then, 15 years later, FBI agents returned to the ranch and began digging near the barn. What they uncovered wasn't random debris. It was the triplets' belongings, hidden in the soil. A shoe, a sketchbook, a screwdriver. Proof they hadn't simply wandered off. Proof someone had buried the truth all along. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support means the world and helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Stick with us until the end, and if this mystery moves you, share your thoughts in the comments and pass it along to a friend. 15 years had passed since the ranch in Portland fell silent. 15 years since the triplets, Emma, Luke, and Sophie, had vanished without a trace. The sun dipped low over the rolling hills that summer evening, casting long shadows across the weathered barn. Inside, dust motes floated lazily in streaks of amber light, stirred only by the slow, deliberate steps of the FBI agents as they approached. Each footfall echoed against the wooden walls, a soft reminder of years forgotten, of secrets buried beneath peeling paint and soil that had swallowed whispers of the past. Agent Reynolds paused, hand resting on the worn doorframe. He squinted at the scattered remnants of the past, a broken wheelbarrow leaning sideways, a faded ribbon tied around a fence post, and the faint scent of hay mixed with something older, something unsettling. The ranch felt alive yet dormant, every corner holding the memory of laughter abruptly silenced. He glanced at his partner, Agent Torres, who shook her head slowly, her eyes scanning the surrounding trees. "It's been quiet too long," she muttered, her voice barely above the hum of cicadas. Outside, the wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying faint echoes of children's footsteps, the sound almost imperceptible but hauntingly familiar. Neighbors, gathered at the edge of the property, watched silently from the tree line. "You think they'll finally find something?" one muttered under her breath, glancing sideways at a neighbor who shrugged, gripping a coffee cup a little too tightly. The old stories, the rumors of the rancher's temper, the suspicions whispered behind closed doors, were resurfacing, tangled with curiosity and fear. Agent Reynolds bent down, brushing a layer of dirt from a small, rusted toy partially buried in the soil. A wooden block, etched with a single faint letter E, half swallowed by time. He held it up, letting the fading sunlight catch the chipped paint, and for a moment he felt the weight of 15 years pressing down on him. Every lost minute, every unanswered question. "They were here," he whispered, almost to himself. The barn door creaked, a slow, deliberate protest, and the agents moved inside, flashlights cutting through the dim gloom. Every beam of light revealed fragments of a life interrupted. A swinging rope tied to a post, the faint outline of chalk marks on the dusty floor, and the lingering scent of warmth and childhood innocence now gone. Outside, a neighbor murmured to another, "I told you something wasn't right that day." The words drifted on the wind, reaching ears that had long stopped listening, now listening again. As the agents worked in careful silence, moving through the decades-old debris, every movement told a story. A chair adjusted, a sleeve tugged, eyes squinting at corners that had not been touched in years. The air was thick, almost viscous, carrying not just dust and sun, but the tension of what might be uncovered. Somewhere, deep beneath the layers of earth and memory, the triplets' absence had left a mark, a shadow stretching across the ranch, and now, finally, someone was looking closely enough to see it. And so, 15 years of silence hung in the air like a question that had been waiting too long for an answer. Reynolds and Torres exchanged a glance, unspoken agreement passing between them. Tonight, the past would finally speak. Summer of '96 on the east edge of Portland smelled like cut grass, diesel, and river silt. The Hartley place sat where pasture met timber. 3 board fences, a red barn sun-faded to salmon, and a porch with a bell by the back door that rang at noon, every noon. Cal Hartley, 41, ranch owner, started his days before light, boots laced, thermos steaming, pencil behind his ear, counting feed sacks with his thumb tapping the totals on the clipboard. He wasn't loud, just precise. The kind of man who lined wrenches by size and noticed when a hinge squeaked wrong. The triplets, Emma, Luke, Sophie, 8 years old and all elbows, moved like sparrows in a flock. Emma braided twine into jump ropes, Luke kept a screwdriver in his pocket like a lucky coin, and Sophie sketched horses on the back of feed receipts. Mornings meant routines. Scoop grain, latch the south gate, check the trough, gather eggs warm as palms. Cal's rule was simple. Stay inside the fence line, do your stops, check back by the bell. Luke would slap the porch post 3 thumps, just to say, "We're here." Neighbors swore you could set your watch by that family. At the feed store, 2 ranchers watched Cal load bales. One murmured, "Runs a tight ship." The other shrugged, half a smirk. "Or he's just keeping busy since, voice trailing off into the clatter of the loading dock. Folks loved to talk on the edges like that. Wow, Triplets' lot for one man. He's strict, but the kids look happy. Gossip hung in the air as steady as dust motes. Inside the house, the kitchen clock ticked like a metronome. A calendar on the fridge was boxed in neat colors: vet, fencing, supply run. Cal rubbed the groove in the table where a marble had rolled so many times it made a shine. At dinner, the kids dropped marbles into a jar for chores, the star jar clinking soft against glass. Nights were small and warm. Ice clinking in Cal's glass, socks peeled off and balled, the squeak of the screen door as Emma brought in the mail. No drama, just a family making days. Boundaries were clear. North pasture. Stop at the old service road. The sign there, "No trespassing," was sun-bleached and leaning, the brush thick beyond it. "Coyotes like that draw," Cal would say, adjusting his hat brim, thumbs hooked in his belt. The Triplets nodded, solemn as deputies. Lines mattered. The bell mattered more. At church potluck, someone would always tilt their head toward the Hartleys. "Kids are polite," a woman whispered, "but he counts them like inventory." Her friends softened it. "He counts because he loves. Let the man be." If you'd driven by that week, you'd have seen ordinary life stitched together with small rituals. Boots by the door, 3 backpacks on a peg, a jump rope coiled like a sleeping snake on the porch step. Nothing felt ominous. Just a map of a day that should have repeated forever. Chores, bell, dinner, marbles, lights out, and Cal's quiet habit at the sink, staring through his reflection into the dark yard, counting under his breath. 1, 2, 3. June 14th, 1996 began like any other day on the Hartley Ranch. Morning haze lifted off the grass, and the air smelled faintly of alfalfa and dust. Emma tied her braids tight, Luke stuffed his screwdriver back into his pocket, and Sophie tucked a scrap of paper with half-finished sketches of horses under the salt shaker, promising she'd come back to finish it after chores. Cal stood at the porch rail with his coffee, steam curling into the cool air. He rattled the bell at 7 o'clock sharp. The Triplets bolted across the yard, bare feet slapping on the boards before slipping into boots by the fence line. To anyone passing by, it looked ordinary, kids doing the same routines they'd done since they could walk. Neighbors noticed the sound of laughter drifting across the fields. Could hear them from a mile off, one woman told investigators years later. Sounded like a pack of puppies. Nothing strange at all. Another neighbor, tightening wire at his fence, said he'd seen Cal lift Sophie up onto the back of a horse just to let her pat its mane. Looked like any proud dad. By noon, the bell rang again. The Triplets came in sweaty and red-cheeked, wolfing down sandwiches at the kitchen table. Cal scribbled figures on his clipboard while they chattered over each other, arguing about who could run fastest down the service road. He cut them off with a raised brow and a muttered, "Stay inside the fence." They groaned but nodded, returning to their sandwiches. That afternoon, Cal took the tractor to the south pasture. The kids played by the barn, a jumble of rope, chalk, and Emma's endless dares. By 5 o'clock, a neighbor driving past saw all 3 chasing each other in the yard. He waved. Luke waved back. Everything seemed fine, he recalled. Why wouldn't it? As dusk settled, Cal returned. Mud streaked on his boots. He clanged the bell for dinner. The porch light flicked on, buzzing faintly. But when he stepped inside, the table sat empty. 3 plates set, but no kids running in. He frowned, muttered under his breath, and rang the bell again. This time, the yard stayed quiet. At first, Cal didn't panic. The Triplets had a habit of dragging their feet at supper time, stalling for 5 more minutes of play. He leaned on the porch post, scanning the yard, listening for the shrill rise of Emma's laugh or the sharp clack of Luke kicking pebbles across the drive. The ranch always carried sound, even faintly. But tonight, nothing. He walked toward the barn, boots crunching gravel, muttering each of their names like a roll call. The barn door swung open with its usual groan. Inside, ropes coiled, hay stacked, Sophie's chalk drawings still smudged on the wall. Empty. He checked the stalls, ducked into the loft, peered behind the tack shelves. No voices giggled from the shadows. By the time he circled back to the house, his movements had lost their rhythm. Cal's jaw clenched as he strode past the fence line toward the service road. Dust hung in the air, unsettled, as if something or someone had moved through recently. A faint scuff marked the dirt where small boots might have slid, but the trail broke off into grass. Neighbors later recalled hearing the bell clang a third, then a fourth time, harder, sharper. One leaned across her porch to her husband and whispered, "That don't sound right." He grunted, shaking his head. "Kids'll turn up." But when Cal returned to the kitchen, the sandwiches still lay untouched on the counter, milk sweating in glasses that had gone warm. The table clock ticked steady, slicing through the silence. He gripped the back of a chair until his knuckles whitened, his chest tight with a thought he wouldn't voice yet. They hadn't just wandered. It was the first night in 8 years that the triplets didn't answer the bell. The sun had already slipped below the ridge when Cal's voice tore across the pasture. He shouted their names, Emma, Luke, Sophie, each one louder, more frantic, echoing into the tree line. His flashlight beam cut through the dusk, swinging wildly across fence posts and brush. The dog barked once, then whined low, uneasy, refusing to leave the porch. By 9 p.m., Cal was in full stride, boots tearing ruts into the dirt as he scoured the property. He checked the barn twice, the loft 3 times. Even crawled under the porch where the triplets sometimes hid during hide-and-seek. Nothing. He banged the bell again and again, the clang sharp enough to carry down the road. The sound drew neighbors. First came the Milners from half a mile east, headlights bouncing as their pickup rolled into the yard. Behind them, the Carmichaels walked over with lanterns in hand. "What's going on?" one asked, but Cal didn't answer. He was already halfway into the north pasture, yelling himself hoarse. Soon a line of neighbors combed the fields, flashlights bobbing, voices calling. "Emma! Luke! Sophie!" The cries overlapped, scattering through the night like desperate prayers. Someone suggested maybe the kids had wandered toward the creek. Another muttered about coyotes, quickly shushed. By midnight, the search reached the old service road. Grass bent where small feet might have run, but no trail carried past the sign. Volunteers stood in uneasy silence, lanterns flickering. One whispered, "They wouldn't have gone out there. Not those kids." His companion nodded grimly. "Then where'd they go?" Back at the ranch house, the kitchen light burned steady, illuminating 3 untouched plates and the milk glasses now gone sour. Cal stood in the doorway, sweat dripping, shirt clinging to his back. His hand shook as he rubbed his temple, whispering to himself, "Not possible. Not all 3. At 1 a.m., someone finally said it aloud, "Call the sheriff." And, just like that, the search shifted, from a father's desperate hunt to a county-wide alarm. The first squad car rolled up the drive just after 2 a.m., headlights washing over the barn like a stage light. Deputies stepped out, notepads in hand, their voices clipped and professional. Sheriff Harlan, a broad man with tired eyes, listened as Cal recounted every detail, the bell, the dinner table, the empty yard. His words came fast, jumbled, like someone trying to plug holes in a sinking boat. The deputies fanned out, flashlights sweeping the fields in clean, practiced arcs. They checked the barn, the creek, the old service road. Dogs sniffed the dirt, noses low, tails stiff. For a moment, one hound pulled hard toward the tree line, but then whined and circled back, as if the scent had dissolved mid-air. Inside the house, an investigator studied the table, 3 plates, untouched, milk glasses clotted with warmth, shoes lined by the door, a sock balled beneath a chair. "Children don't vanish barefoot without grabbing a thing," he muttered, jotting notes. By dawn, the official search was underway. Flyers printed, volunteers organized into grids, deputies marking maps with grease pencils. Helicopters circled the ranch, blades chopping through the early fog. Still, contradictions surfaced fast. A deputy swore he found a single scuff in the dirt near the north fence, but no trail leading away. Another insisted he saw boot prints larger than Cal's leading toward the creek. Sheriff Harlan dismissed both. Animals, shadows. Don't overthink. His voice was flat, too flat. Neighbors, gathered at the fence line, whispered among themselves. "Funny, ain't it? Not a sound, not a sign. 3 kids don't just vanish, not like that." One older man shook his head. "Mark my words, this ain't the woods doing." As the sun rose over the Hartley ranch, the contradiction was already clear. The ground gave pieces of a story, but none of them fit. By the second night, the official search was running like clockwork. Grid sweeps, dogs, maps spread over truck hoods. But out beyond the taped perimeter, neighbors stood in clusters, voices low, trading theories the way folks trade cards. They were right there in the yard, one woman hissed, her arms crossed tight. You don't lose 3 at once unless someone wanted them gone, her husband muttered back. Or unless someone let it happen. His eyes flicked toward the ranch house, where Cal stood on the porch, shoulders hunched, staring out into nothing. At the feed store 2 days later, whispers spread faster than the flyers. Cal was too strict. Kids wanted out. Maybe he snapped. One rancher leaned close to another, voice pitched low. Man keeps his boots lined up by size, counts every nail in his shed. I bet he counted those kids too. The other shrugged, but the thought stuck. Some defended him. Mrs. Carmichael, who'd seen the triplets that very afternoon, shook her head. He doted on them, don't care what anyone says. Those kids were his pride. But even she lowered her voice when a deputy walked past, like speaking too loud might stir something dangerous. Reporters swarmed in by day 3, their vans parked crooked on the gravel shoulder. Cameras turned, microphones shoved forward. Cal gave no statement, just a curt shake of the head, his jaw tight. That silence only fed the talk. If he had nothing to hide, he'd say something. Someone whispered near the fence. Another shot back. Or maybe he knows words won't bring him back. The gossip bled into town. At church, during coffee hour, folks leaned close over styrofoam cups. At the diner, waitresses swapped theories with the rhythm of clinking plates. The sheriff tried to squash it, but rumors grow where answers don't. And answers were nowhere. No footprints. No screams. No signs of struggle. Just 3 empty plates on a kitchen table, and a father ringing a bell into silence. By the end of the first week, suspicion no longer lingered in shadows. It had found a shape, a name. And more, that name was Cal Hartley. By the end of week 1, Portland's ranching community had split down the middle. On one side were those who stood by Cal, neighbors who'd seen him raise those kids single-handedly after his wife passed, who swore he was strict but never cruel. On the other were voices growing louder, convinced the rancher's silence meant guilt. At the post office, 2 men nearly came to blows. One jabbed a finger at the other's chest. You think he'd hurt his own kids? I've watched him mend fences with those triplets hanging off his arms like puppies. The other shot back. Then you explain how 3 vanished from his yard without a sound. In town, whispers turned to judgment. Some muttered that Cal was too rigid, too cold, pointing to the way he kept his yard spotless, tools lined like soldiers. Others claimed they'd seen flashes of temper, slamming a truck door too hard, barking orders sharp enough to sting. Every tiny memory was suddenly evidence. But back at the ranch, support quietly gathered. A few women cooked meals and dropped them off on the porch, murmuring, "Stay strong, Cal." One old ranch hand stood at the fence line every evening, saying little, just a nod to let him know he wasn't alone. The division was stark. In cafes, folks leaned closer when his name came up, choosing sides in hushed tones. He's guilty of something. He's guilty of losing what he loved. Even among the deputies, cracks showed. One young officer muttered to another, "Don't sit right. 3 kids, no trace? If it ain't him, it's someone he knew." His partner scowled. "Shut it. Sheriff says keep it clean." The Hartley Ranch, once just another spread of pasture and timber, had become a stage. And the whole town was split between casting Cal as a grieving father, or a man with a secret he wouldn't share. By the 10th day, the county sheriff's office was exhausted. Volunteers were thinning. Reporters were multiplying, and still there was nothing. No footprints beyond the fence, no scraps of clothing, no ransom notes. The weight of 3 missing children, all from the same house, was more than the small department could carry. That's when the FBI rolled in. 2 black SUVs kicked up dust as they pulled into the Hartley Drive. Out stepped agents in crisp suits, notebooks tucked under their arms, eyes scanning the property like they'd stepped onto foreign soil. Agent Reynolds, tall and measured, shook Cal's hand with a firm grip but didn't linger in conversation. Agent Torres, sharper in her observations, studied every detail. The bell by the porch, the swing half-twisted in the wind, the way Cal's boots left fresh imprints pacing the yard. Neighbors watched from a distance, whispering behind fence posts. Feds don't come unless something's bad wrong. Or unless they think it's him. The FBI combed through everything. They measured the barn, lifted boards from the porch, even dug shallow test pits around the yard. They questioned Cal for hours, his answers steady but clipped. Where were the children last seen? Did he notice anything unusual? Who came by the ranch in recent weeks? Cal repeated his story, voice low, eyes fixed on the table. Behind him, Torres watched closely. She noted the way his hand trembled when he reached for his coffee, the long pauses before certain answers. Later, she'd tell Reynolds, "He's either holding something back, or he's a man crushed under silence." For the families in town, the FBI's presence was both hope and fear. Hope that finally, answers might come. Fear that the truth, whatever it was, might be worse than anyone had whispered. By the end of that week, the case was no longer just Portland's burden. The Hartley Ranch was now the center of a federal investigation, and the gossip only grew sharper. The first break came on the 12th day. A trucker passing through claimed he'd seen 3 kids walking along the interstate shoulder just outside Portland. He swore they matched the Hartley triplets. Same height, same hair, barefoot in the dust. Local papers ran the headline before agents had time to check it out. By evening, the FBI confirmed what many suspected: false. The children belonged to a traveling family from Idaho, alive and well in a nearby campground. Still, the rumor had already done its damage. "See?" one man muttered at the diner. "They ran away. Kids don't vanish. They bolt." Another replied, "8-year-olds don't get far on foot. Not 3 of them." Days later, another lead surfaced, a drifter spotted in Portland, loitering near playgrounds, muttering to himself. Deputies pulled him in, questioned him for hours. He had no connection, no evidence tying him to the ranch. Released. But whispers spread anyway. Maybe he took them. Maybe he stashed them somewhere. The FBI grew restless. They'd followed every call, every so-called sighting. All of it dissolved into smoke. Agent Reynolds admitted to his partner one night at the motel, "Feels like the case is running us, not the other way around." Back on the ranch, Cal watched each false lead play out in silence. Neighbors noted his blank stare, his absence from town meetings. Some said grief hollowed him out. Others whispered it was guilt tightening his jaw. And through it all, the truth remained the same. Not a single trace of Emma, Luke, or Sophie had surfaced. No clothing, no ransom, no bodies. Just theories spun like threads, snapping one by one under the weight of silence. The lost children's story was starting to feel more like a smokescreen than an explanation. By the fall of 1996, the search had slowed to a crawl. Volunteers trickled back to their lives. Deputies moved on to other cases. Reporters packed their cameras and left the gravel roads quiet again. The Hartley Ranch remained, unchanged on the surface, but carrying a silence that pressed on everything. Seasons turned, but the triplets never came home. Their bikes leaned against the barn, chains rusting. A jump rope lay curled on the porch like a forgotten snake. In the kitchen, the star jar for chores stayed half-filled, glass cloudy with dust. Cal never touched it. Neighbors said sometimes, late at night, you could hear the bell clang once, sharp, lonely, like he still hoped the kids might come running. The community shifted uneasily. For some, suspicion hardened. At the feed store, a rancher muttered, "No evidence means it's in his house somewhere." Another cut in, "Drop it. Man lost his kids. Don't twist the knife." The split remained, carved deeper by every year without answers. Cal himself seemed to shrink. His boots grew heavier, shoulders stooped, hair gone salt and pepper almost overnight. He worked the ranch in silence, days running together in a loop. Fence, feed, field, sleep. He didn't remarry. Didn't move. Just waited, though for what, no one knew. By the early 2000s, the case was officially labeled cold. Files stacked in boxes, red stamps reading unresolved. The FBI checked in less and less. Locals stopped asking directly, but their glances carried unspoken questions. Kids who had once played with the triplets grew into teens, driving trucks past the ranch and lowering their voices as they passed. That's where they disappeared. 15 years stretched long. The ranch sagged under the weight of time, barn roof caving in, weeds crawling up the fences. The triplets' absence wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was a shadow stitched into the land itself. And then, in 2011, the FBI came back. Though the case files gathered dust, the memory of Emma, Luke, and Sophie never really left Portland. It clung to small places, reminders so ordinary they felt like traps. In town, the school kept their cubbies empty for months, backpacks still hanging by rusted hooks, until a janitor finally cleared them away. At church, 3 paper angels from the last Christmas play remained taped to the back wall, yellowed with time. The congregation never took them down. Their relatives marked birthdays quietly. Emma would have been 16 when her aunt lit 3 candles on a kitchen counter, each flame trembling in the draft. Luke would have been 18 the day his grandfather opened a box of old tools, setting aside a screwdriver he'd once carried in his pocket. Sophie's cousins kept her drawings folded into shoeboxes, lines fading but horses still running across the page. Neighbors remembered too, though mostly in whispers. At the diner, 2 women leaned close over coffee. Sometimes I swear I hear them in the fields, kids laughing. The other shook her head. That's just wind in the grass. But neither looked certain. Cal carried the memories differently. He never sold the ranch, never tore down the swing Emma had tied to the oak. Sometimes he sat there at dusk, the seat creaking under his weight, staring toward the service road where the trail ended. His lips moved, counting under his breath, 1, 2, 3, like he always had. 15 years passed, but the triplets' absence never softened. It just grew heavier, like the silence itself had learned to settle in people's bones. And then, in 2011, that silence cracked open when the FBI knocked on the Hartley Ranch door again. In the spring of 2011, a fresh task force reopened a cluster of unsolved child disappearances in Oregon. Among the folders pulled from storage was one stamped Hartley Ranch, 1996. The box was dusty, its corners softened with age, but inside lay photographs, redacted reports, and transcripts that had never sat right. Agent Reynolds spread the files across a conference table. One photo showed the Hartley kitchen, 3 plates, milk glasses half drunk. Another captured the service road, grass bent in a way that looked deliberate, almost swept, but it was the log sheets that snagged his attention. Deputies had noted a single scuff at the north fence, a larger boot print near the creek. Both were circled, then struck through in red pen with a note. Not relevant. Torres, reading over his shoulder, frowned. Not relevant? That's evidence. Someone scrubbed this. Other oddities stacked up. Witness statements had been clipped, with entire paragraphs missing. A neighbor's account of seeing a truck near the property that evening was labeled unconfirmed and filed away. A deputy's claim that the dogs lost a scent abruptly in the meadow was noted once, then never referenced again. Torres leaned back, exhaling sharply. It's like they trimmed the file to fit the story. That story, of course, had been simple. 3 kids vanished, presumed runaway or lost. But 15 years later, the narrative looked paper-thin. Reynolds ran his thumb across the last page, where closed was stamped in heavy ink. His jaw tightened. Closed, he muttered, because someone wanted it closed. The decision came quickly. They would revisit the ranch itself. Not just the house, but the soil, the barn, the forgotten corners left to rot. Time had covered the evidence, but time also revealed what had been hidden in haste. And so, 15 years after the triplets vanished, the FBI headed back to the Hartley Ranch, ready to unearth whatever had been buried there. When Reynolds and Torres pulled into the Hartley Ranch, the place looked frozen in time. The barn leaned harder to one side. Weeds clawed through the fence rails, but the house stood exactly as it had in the photographs. Porch light crooked, bell still bolted to its post. Cal met them at the door. He was older, thinner, lines cut deep into his face, but his eyes hadn't dulled. He didn't ask why they were there. He simply stepped aside, letting them pass into a house that smelled of dust, coffee, and wood smoke. Inside, the kitchen clock still ticked steady. The star jar sat on the counter, half-filled, untouched, for 15 years. Torres bent close, her breath fogging the glass. He never moved it, she whispered. Reynolds just nodded, scribbling a note. Outside, the agents began their sweep. They brought new tools. Ground-penetrating radar, soil probes, high-resolution scanners. Where deputies had once walked in quick sweeps, the FBI now moved slow, methodical. Every inch of pasture, barn, and service road was mapped. That first afternoon, Torres paused near the north fence. The ground there sagged strangely, the earth darker than the rest. She crouched, pressed her hand against the soil. "Looks disturbed," she murmured. Reynolds marked it with a flag. Neighbors gathered at the tree line again, whispering like they had in '96. "What do you think they're looking for?" one asked. Another leaned closer, voice low. "Bodies, or something just as bad." As the sun dropped, floodlights lit the ranch yard in stark white. The agent stood over flagged spots, silent, as if listening to the land itself breathe. For the first time in 15 years, the ranch wasn't just a place of absence. It was speaking again, piece by piece. And the FBI was listening. The dig began at dawn, the hum of generators and the grind of shovels breaking the stillness. Neighbors lined the fence like spectators at a grim parade, arms folded tight against a morning chill. Cal sat on the porch, hat brim low, watching in silence as the FBI marked sections of his land with bright orange flags. It didn't take long. By mid-morning, Torres called Reynolds over to a shallow pit near the barn. There, tangled in roots, lay something small, metal catching the sun. She brushed the soil gently with a gloved hand. A child's hair clip, pink enamel, shaped like a butterfly, the paint chipped but unmistakable. Further in, near the north fence, radar pinged again. The team dug carefully, unearthing a rusted tin lunchbox. Inside, wrapped in moldy cloth, were 3 objects: a marble, a broken whistle, and a piece of twine knotted into a braid. The air grew heavy. These weren't random finds. They were fragments of the Triplets world. The same marble Cal once rolled across the kitchen table, Sophie's favorite whistle, Emma's rope. Time had buried them, but the land had held on. Reynolds held up the lunchbox, its lid squealing on rusted hinges. The murmurs from the fence line turned sharp, almost accusing. "So they were here," one man muttered. Another woman whispered back. 15 years, and it's still in his dirt. Inside the house, Cal gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles white. Reporters later said he looked like a man watching his own heart being unearthed. To some, his silence screamed guilt. To others, it was grief, raw and bone-deep. Torres bagged the evidence, her expression tight. "These were hidden," she said quietly. Reynolds nodded. "Not lost. Hidden." The first reveal had cracked the silence wide open. The Triplets hadn't vanished into the wind. They had left traces, deliberately buried, close enough to find, but far enough to keep questions alive. And now, those questions were louder than ever. The evidence should have blown the case wide open. Instead, it lit a fuse of resistance. Within days of the lunchbox and hair clip being logged, calls started coming in from old county officials, men who had worn badges back in '96. Their tone was careful but firm. "You're stirring up ghosts best left buried." At a press briefing, the county sheriff's office tried to soften the blow. "Objects found on the Hartley property are not conclusive," the spokesman read stiffly from a page. "They may have been placed there years earlier, unrelated to the disappearance." The statement landed like a brick. Neighbors muttered under their breath. Unrelated? They were the kids' things. Agent Torres bristled. She'd watched deputies box the lunchbox, seen the worn twine braid in her own hands. "This isn't coincidence," she told Reynolds after the briefing. "Somebody hid those items. And they're trying to make us look away, again." Behind closed doors, retired deputies refused interviews. One flat out told a local reporter, "There's no story here. It was solved. Kids got lost. That's all." The reporter printed the quote anyway, fueling more doubt than reassurance. In town, gossip sharpened. "Cover up," one rancher hissed over his beer. "Always was." Another shot back. "Or maybe they're just protecting one of their own." Eyes shifted toward the ranch house on the hill, its porch light still burning late into the night. The pushback only deepened suspicion. It wasn't just about the Triplets anymore. It was about who had kept the truth sealed and why. When the FBI finds went public, old memories bubbled up from Portland's backroads like water through cracked earth. Folks who'd stayed quiet in '96 suddenly leaned across diner tables, voices lowered, eyes darting. The whispers weren't new, but now they carried weight. Mrs. Carmichael, who lived just over the ridge, admitted she'd seen headlights on the service road the night the Triplets vanished. "Too late for ranch work," she said, stirring her coffee. "I told the deputies back then, but they waved me off." Her friend frowned, whispering, "You never told me that." She just shrugged. "Didn't think it mattered. Guess it does now." Others remembered figures near the fence line. One teenager, now grown, told reporters he'd seen a man standing near the north pasture, still as stone, while he rode his bike home that evening. He hadn't come forward as a boy, afraid of being dismissed. Now he swore he hadn't imagined it. At the feed store, 2 ranchers argued over the counter. "I heard boots on gravel that night, clear as a bell," one said. "Not Cal's stride. Someone heavier." The other shook his head, muttering. And yet, all that vanished from the reports. Even stranger stories resurfaced. A farmhand swore he heard voices calling names. Emma, Luke, Sophie, fading into the trees after midnight. He told his boss in '96, but the man told him to keep quiet if he wanted to keep his job. As whispers multiplied, a pattern formed. People had seen things, heard things, reported them, but those details had been clipped, erased, buried under the official lost children story. The FBI logged every account, pinning them against the original files. Torres muttered, flipping through her notes. They weren't just silenced by fear. They were silenced on purpose. And around Portland, the gossip shifted from blame to something sharper. If the triplets didn't vanish alone, then who else was walking the Hartley ranch that night? The new testimonies gave the FBI a map the old files never had. Headlights on the service road, boot prints larger than Cal's, voices in the dark, threads pointing away from the ranch house and toward the land beyond the north fence. Torres and Reynolds pulled property records. Less than a mile past the boundary sat an abandoned parcel, once owned by a distant cousin of the Hartleys, long since left to rot. Locals had whispered about it for years: a sagging barn, a collapsed shed, windows boarded like blind eyes. Deputies in '96 had marked it cleared, though the search log showed no evidence they ever stepped foot inside. The agents walked the overgrown track in late summer heat, weeds whipping at their legs, the smell of damp earth rising heavy. The barn groaned against the wind, doors chained shut with rust. Torres brushed her hand over the lock, then nodded to Reynolds. No one's touched this in years. Inside, dust thickened the air, coating beams, planks, and the remnants of tools left to decay. But near the back wall, beneath warped boards, soil lay darker, disturbed. A probe pushed through too easily, hitting hollow space beneath. Neighbors, watching from the road, saw the floodlights go up that evening. "They found something," one whispered. His companion crossed her arms, uneasy. 15 years later. God help us. For the first time since the triplets vanished, the investigation had a new trail, one that bent away from coincidence and toward intent. The ranch hadn't been the only place holding secrets. The excavation began under harsh white floodlights, the barn creaking like it resented being woken after so many years. Agents in gloves worked slowly, pulling back warped boards, peeling away layers of soil that smelled of rot and rust. Every movement was deliberate, like the ground itself was holding its breath. Just past midnight, the first object surfaced, a small shoe, leather stiff and curled with age, the sole worn thin where a child had once dragged a toe. Torres crouched, her flashlight trembling slightly as she tilted it in her hand. The size matched Emma's. Minutes later, a second find, a dented thermos with faded cartoon horses galloping across its side. Inside, long dried mud rattled against the metal. Reynolds held it up, silent, his jaw tight. Then came the box. Buried deeper, sealed with rusted nails, it took 2 agents to pry open. Inside were belongings no stranger could have planted. Sophie's sketchbook, pages stuck together but drawings still visible. Horses, barns, the very oak tree with the swing. Luke's screwdriver, wrapped in cloth, initials scratched into the handle. The air grew heavy around the pit. Neighbors at the road shifted uneasily, whispering. 15 years, all this time, right there. One older man muttered. And they said they searched. Torres stared down at the box, her breath caught between fury and grief. "These aren't lost things," she said. "They were taken here, hidden here." Reynolds only nodded, his eyes locked on the darkness below the disturbed soil, as if more might still be waiting. For the families, the finds were devastating proof. The triplets had never run away. They hadn't vanished into thin air. Someone had brought them here, tucked their lives into boxes, sealed them under dirt. The second reveal was no longer about speculation. It was evidence. Evidence that demanded the next question. Who had access to this place, and why had it been ignored for 15 years? 2 weeks after the barn excavation, a retired deputy agreed to meet with the FBI in a diner off the highway. His hair had gone silver, his posture bent, but his hands still fidgeted with the sugar packets on the table. He didn't make eye contact at first. Reynolds slid a photograph across the formica, the box, the sketchbook, Luke's screwdriver. The deputy stared, lips tightening. Finally, he muttered, "We found that barn in '96. We were told to leave it." Torres leaned forward. "Told by who?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Sheriff Harlan said it was family land. Nothing out there but junk. We logged it as cleared. I knew it wasn't right, but—" His voice trailed off. When pressed, he admitted more. There had been a call from higher up in the county. The Hartleys were respected. Old money in ranching. A scandal about missing kids tied to family property could wreck reputations, drag the county through lawsuits. They wanted it tied off neat, he said. Runaway or lost in the woods. Easier to stomach. Torres's pen froze mid-sentence. Reynolds sat back, shaking his head slowly. So evidence was buried, on purpose. The deputy's hands shook as he crumpled the sugar packet wrapper. "I thought about coming forward, but careers, families. Fear. You get it. His eyes finally lifted. I'm sorry. Too damn late now. Outside, word spread fast. At the gas station, two ranchers argued in hushed tones. See? They covered it up. Covered what, though? Protecting who? The confession was a crack in the dam, and through it the truth began to pour. When the FBI returned the recovered items to the Hartley family, the room fell into a silence so heavy it seemed to press the air flat. On the table lay Sophie's sketchbook, pages warped and brittle but still showing her careful pencil strokes. Beside it, Luke's screwdriver, handle scratched, initials faint but unmistakable, and Emma's small shoe, cracked leather curling like petals. Cal sat across from the evidence, shoulders hunched, hat brim shadowing his eyes. He didn't reach for the objects. He only stared, lips moving as if silently counting. 1, 2, 3. His sister, who had driven in from Spokane, reached out with trembling fingers to touch the shoe. She gasped, pulled her hand back like it burned. 15 years, she whispered. And all this time, it was just sitting there. The family's grief spilled into fury. At a press gathering days later, Emma's aunt stood stiff at the podium. We were told they ran away. We were told they got lost. And now we know. Our children's lives were hidden, and the truth was buried with them. Her voice cracked, but her stare stayed sharp. Who gave that order? Who let this happen? Neighbors watched from the crowd, guilt etched into their faces. Some avoided eye contact altogether, haunted by memories of whispers left unspoken. Others crossed their arms and muttered, "Knew it didn't add up." We all knew. For Cal, the reckoning was quieter, lonelier. Nights found him on the porch, bell rope clutched in one hand, swinging it once into the darkness. The clang echoed across the empty yard. A call no one answered. The FBI pressed on, chasing leads. But for the family, the damage was already carved deep. They hadn't only lost the triplets. They'd lost 15 years to silence, to red tape, to neighbors' suspicions and official indifference. And now all that remained was truth too heavy to lift, and questions still hanging in the air like smoke. Who hid the triplets' belongings, and why was the truth buried under so much dust? 15 years after Emma, Luke, and Sophie vanished, the FBI had unearthed fragments of their lives. Shoes, sketches, a whistle, a screwdriver. Enough to prove they hadn't wandered off. Enough to show someone had hidden their childhood beneath the soil. But not enough to name who or why. The official record now reads, "Evidence recovered. Case ongoing." But for Portland, the truth is heavier than paperwork. It's in the swing that still hangs limp from the oak at the Hartley Ranch. It's in the empty plates that Cal never cleared from the cupboard. It's in the bell rope, frayed from his grip, ringing out into silence. Neighbors still whisper. Some say the FBI knows more than they've admitted. Others claim the trail leads beyond the ranch, into old family ties and debts that were never spoken of. But the echoes of that summer night in 1996 remain unanswered, hanging in the dark like voices calling children's names that never returned. And maybe that's the story's cruelest truth. The land gives back objects, but not the missing. Evidence surfaces, but never closure. So the question lingers. 15 years later, who led the triplets away from their yard? And why did it take so long for anyone to dig deep enough to find the truth? And that's the haunting case of the Hartley triplets. 3 children who vanished without a sound, and the disturbing evidence unearthed 15 years later. But the biggest question still remains. Who led them away that night, and why was the truth buried for so long? Share your theories in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss the next story. And if you know someone who loves unsolved mysteries, send this video to them. Because the more we talk about these forgotten cases, the harder it becomes for them to stay hidden.